All right, so I got something here on screen. It might be considered a piece of evidence. This comes from the Carnegie Philanthropic Foundation, the endowment, carnegie.org. There's a link on it. In this picture, you can see such illustrious internationalists such as David Rockefeller, Bill Gates Sr., George Soros, and there's a guy called Tony Fauci. He's in there too. This is 2001, by the way, because David Rockefeller published his memoirs in 2001 and he passed away probably shortly right after this picture. George Soros is still out there. Tony Fauci, I'm not sure what he's doing today. And there's a couple other notable people in that photo. But let me now show the importance, because someone might say, well, they took a photo together. What's that mean? And I love it when people say stuff like that, because then I say, well, what does that mean? What is the Carnegie Foundation? What is the grammar? What is this foundation that's given this freedom award medal type thing, philanthropic organization? What is it? Oh, was it part of the Dodd report, the Reese Committee Foundation report?
Yeah, we're going to bring in
found guilty of un-American activities, along with the Rockefeller Foundation and the Ford Foundation. And it goes
actually, Rich, let me just, that's a great point, because when I think the very first time I hosted by myself, I read through some of the foundations. Was that
the Renee Wormser?
Renee Wormser
Foundations, Their Power and Influence is written by the lawyer for the Reese Committee, Renee Wormser. Very good piece of evidence. Very good piece of evidence. Go ahead.
But I remember in that, so he talks about culture. He talks about affecting culture. Carnegie and Rockefeller, specifically in that book, are charged with affecting the culture. They went after the culture and wanted to turn over cultural values in America through education and weaponizing social science specifically. So there, he's complaining about how do we affect the culture. Well, here is a committee that shows that they were directly affecting the culture to bring in more it was before critical race theory, but to certainly bring in a whole different...
that changed the attitudes, values, behaviors, and beliefs of Americans to be more in line with the communist ideas.
And I read
the Soviet Union. That's explicitly what the internationalist, globalist, nonprofit foundations, which are not a conspiracy, they are a very real thing. This is the very real book that Tony was just referring to. And I have several copies of this book. This one you can see has a bunch of pages marked in it. This is the Dodd report, the Reese Committee on Foundations. And this
Always get Norman Dodd and Reese.
And this is the congressional report. Norman Dodd was the research director. You can read his foreword. You can read in 1933 to 1936, a change took place which so drastic as to constitute a revolution. They also indicated conclusively that the responsibility for the economic welfare of America had been transferred to heavily to the executive branch of federal government. And in seeking to explain this unprecedented phenomenon, he goes through and they identify which foundations have foundations use their resources for purposes contrary for which they were established. Are these resources and purposes used classed as un-American? And they go through and then they say the Ford, Carnegie, and Rockefeller foundations.
They were the big three that they mention over and over and over again, all over that book, especially in weaponizing social sciences to change cultural attitudes in America to accept more Soviet ways.
These foundations also drove the CIA, the creation of the CIA, drove MK Ultra, Operation Paperclip, all these sort of things. The Carnegie Corporation in New York, Ford Foundation, control over human behavior. Oh my goodness, this is a congressional finding. Maybe we should actually understand what's going on. In conclusion, it seems credible that the trustees of these organizations, typically American fortune-created foundations, should have permitted them to be used to finance ideas and practices incompatible with the fundamental concepts of our Constitution. Yet there seems evidence that this may have occurred, right? So he presents the evidence very objectively, saying, hey, there's evidence that you got to go through and read it. We can go through...
objectively, oh my God, it's unreal. It's just page after page after page of specifically how they did it, how much money was spent, what universities they went to, who are the specific directors of their university, or those programs within in the universities, particularly in the social sciences department. It's a scathing expose.
Now, if... someone like Tim or Ian were to look at Norman Dodd the G. Edward Griffin interview, right? Ian's always talking about Federal Reserve. G. Edward Griffin's the grandfather of that movement, Creature from Jekyll Island, along with
And where did that come from?
Secrets of Federal Reserve.
Yes, yeah,
right.
Got it.
All right, and Ed Griffin and also Stan Monteith did interviews with Norman Dodd, who created the Reese Committee report, and he was like 94, but he's a Yale graduate. He's very, very well spoken. Even at that age, he was able to articulate clearly with names, dates, facts about the matter that remain to be, they remain today to be verified and valid. So, and that accompanied by the lawyer from the proceedings, Renee Wormser, and what he has to say, there's a whole bunch of valid pieces of evidence that definitely paint out the picture, not just a few dots you're connecting with lines, a whole rich tapestry of the real ruling elite that shape and influence the future of America.
Look, I have to, teaching logic, I'd be remiss if I didn't say Tim Pool certainly has a point. You need direct evidence. I can understand that issue, but that doesn't mean we can't build context to help us if direct evidence then emerges to implicate those individuals that might be behind specific scenarios. Well, and there's a lot of context around Bill Gates, his history, his family history, when it comes to eugenics, particularly his father. And
what do you consider to be direct evidence? Like if someone said it in their own words that they're doing it, is that direct evidence? I offer H.G. Wells. I offer David Rockefeller. Do you need more? Because I do have more.
No, I'm not arguing against those individuals, but in this context, I'm just talking about in Tim Pool's context, is specifically speaking about Bill Gates. When people jump from Bill Gates says
he
this,
and then himself in the Rockefeller Foundation image. I was just discovered how to get out of antitrust by becoming a pseudo philanthropist, just like Standard Oil and JD did.
Yeah, like there's a connection with the methodology of how the Rockefellers did it,
and the picture that I just showed in my browser of Bill Gates' dad hanging out with David Rockefeller and George Soros. So that's where Bill Gates is coming from: Planned Parenthood, eugenics, Cold Spring Harbor, Eastern establishment families who believe in preservation of the favored races.
Correct. So now that's great, because now once you build
club, depopulation.
Now when you build context,
yes,
that this is where we can actually make a logical deduction, a judgment about it. May not be certain, but it can be highly probable. There's nothing fallacious about making a highly probable deduction that Bill Gates has some foreknowledge and especially with the fact that has a family history of eugenics, is using the Rockefeller model to hide his philanthropic ideals in order to create more money and more wealth than he could ever dream of when he was just selling a graphical user interface to the public.
Eugenics, Jeffrey Epstein.
Then you have the Epstein, you have the Zorro Ranch connection. There's so much. So making that logical leap, it's not here's A and here's D. If you build in all this context, it's not that crazy. The conspiracy theories aren't that crazy for making that deduction that Bill Gates seems to have a philosophy where he believes that the world is overpopulated and there's all these climate issues, all these supranational issues seem to coalesce with him, and in order to create a situation where he can then abuse national governments and control the mainstream narrative, which is interesting that the Mint News Press comes out with over 30,000 grants and $319 million to influence the media and his connections.
Well, how many
with vaccines.
Times did we see
and then if you
Bill
look
Gates
at the money,
on TV
if you look at the
beginning of the pandemic,
right?
How many times
exactly.
did we see that dude doing videos on coronavirus and vaccines and all this sort of stuff at the beginning? Were those his paid appearances on those channels? One has to ask. And if so, why so strategically to shape the policies of Tony Fauci and these other people? Because that's the culture downstream. That politics is downstream from Bill Gates's culture of
right. That's exactly right.
And why is Bill Gates funding the World Health Organization along with the Chinese Communist Party at the same time?
And why does he support China? Why does he support the Chinese model? Why is he so adamant that the Chinese model, the way they're doing this sort of capitalism with Chinese characteristics or some bullshit, or communism, which they had some sort of stupid phrase, but he loves that. But in fact, the partner network that Microsoft employed is sort of that model where it's all controlled by Microsoft, but the partners can use the developmental framework in order to compete against one another and go and sell these products, but it's still all controlled by one central organization. Bill Gates loves that. So you're arguing
it's about control.
Mm-hmm.
But he claims to be a philanthropist. And then I'd point to Club of Rome says they're philanthropists, and they're clearly about control. Do these people know each other? Yes, they do know each other. These
Do they
groups.
network, Rich? Do they network?
Do they network?
Oh, wait, you just showed a picture.
Are they working on the same plan by Cecil Rhodes to take over the world? Maybe. Only if you trace it back in history would you notice. But maybe there's a common place where the stream is starting.
So I need to get this on the record. This comes from a person that goes by the name, a moniker of Space Jelly. And actually, James pointed out that she's doing, I think it's a woman doing incredible work for him on his website in regards to going through a lot of these documents. And this kind of goes to just building again. We're just building out context right now. And I think this is important before people take me to task on this. So I'm going to bring this up. I think this is from 2018, United States Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. This is from January 23rd, 2018. This got sent to me today, or was posted in the COVID news for GTW subscribers. It's in the text channel labeled COVID news. Thank you again, Space Jelly, and awesome research. But I'm just going to read the bolded parts. Now, I can't bring over my Discord because Discord doesn't allow me to remove my friends. I don't want people to see that. So I'm just going to go right to the sections she pointed out. It is now possible to engineer new traits into old viruses. For example, it is becoming possible to take the lethality of one virus and combine it with the contagious qualities of another virus. And last week, scientists published research showing how they synthetically could create horsepox, a close viral relative of smallpox. We don't have the oversight system we need to fully understand or manage these kinds of developments yet, either in the US or internationally. Whatever we do about this, we need to ensure that we don't slow down science that drives so many good things forward. Like,
I have a question. Is that like a chimera?
Just going to say the same thing like SARS-CoV-2, right?
Like a chimera where you cut and paste with the no-seum technique that you learned from Ralph Barrick down at University of North Carolina under Fauci's direction.
CGG insert and the
working with the bat lady, Xi Jinping.
Xi Jinping. They're having a party, apparently, one of those bat caves.
In the bat cave with Peter Daszak, because he's the Batman.
So here's another bolded section. It is clear that hospitals do not have that capability. They are simply not equipped for those larger events, and they are living too close to the margins with just-in-time inventories to be able to surge, making the point that hospitals will not be able to do this. The U.S. government... And the U.S. government should put in place a plan for conducting research during public health emergencies to study new medicines, vaccines, and other clinical and public health interventions to gauge whether they are effective and safe. We'll see how well that's worked.
I'd rather have Dr. McCullough and Bartlett and Pierre Corey and these guys developing early treatments and Zelenko than trust these people.
But don't worry, Pfizer and Merck are coming out with a drug.
Pfizer and Merck are coming out with it.
It was the same mechanism of action as
it was Merck that had the smallpox in their freezers.
It's a protease inhibitor. It's the same mechanism of action as ivermectin. But ivermectin bad. This new
ivermectin bad. Or this new Merck drug Pfizer. Good.
Yeah, right. So, and we all know about Pfizer. You know, the right hand, you have the Pfizer CEOs, and then they're over here, they're at the FDA or the CDC, and we've covered that ad nauseum at this point. We don't need to mention that, like Gottlieb and so forth, or Janet Woodcock, or Yellen, and so forth and so on.
You're talking Scott Gottlieb.
So, yes.
Not the Gottlieb from MK Ultras, because sometimes I get them mixed up. They're both into human experimentation, but it's different
connected
decades.
Somehow, family?
Don't know.
Family
is Adam Curtis related to Lionel Curtis?
I saw McCullough in that picture.
It's different.
So you got to be careful. That's for the apophenia and patternicity fallacy.
David McCullough, he was a journalist back.
I know I'm being facetious, but that's just to point out that Tim is right. You can be sometimes people play the connect the dots, and they will pattern. The patternicity fallacy, our mind, that's what our mind does. We notice, we
once you know it's
patterns.
Not apophenia and parallelia.
But when you provide context by looking into the grammar, when you actually see what these people do, what they're interested in, what they finance, and what their philosophies are, it provides context to that pattern, so you can make more logical deductions and judgments that aren't always perfect and are sometimes probable, but it's okay to make a judgment that leads to a probable conclusion.
Yeah, and I think the connecting dot process is for understanding, not for like the argumentation. For example, I mean, I might have which button does it? This one. I might have connected a few dots in the past, but there's a story, and this is the raw information for that story. So if you want to know about the British conquest to recolonize America from 1781 to present, which includes the War of 1812, all these sort of things up to present, 20th century included, then they would have this as like a subtitle. And before that, you had the British Empire ruling the world and the opium subjugation of the Orient continent, all sorts of fun stuff that they were doing, working in Afghanistan to prep the land for the opium poppy crops that we inherited today in the 20-year Afghanistan war. All these sorts of things.
They were delivering culture to the rich. They were
yes, of course,
the world, and free trade, all the good stuff.
They claimed that they had to bring, variety of new philosophies, land ownership, theology, land ownership, taxation.
It was what they called the manifest destiny.
Slave ownership, all these concepts they had to introduce and formalize for these people, because
but it was manifest destiny.
They love them. It's humanitarian. When you hear people like the Club of Rome, they're doing it for humanitarian reasons. Bill Gates, he's doing it for humanitarian reasons. George Soros, because he loves people and he thinks he's Jesus, according to his quotes in the LA Times article. He has a messiah complex. Yeah. These people who are out there making plans for other people's freedom, I think it's not that they're good or bad. It's not that we have to just do something about it. It's just once people know that what they're seeing on TV is highly choreographed and not to help you embolden your freedom, great. Then they tune someplace else. But as long as they keep thinking that, man in the purple sweater on the stage talking about the COVID and the vaccines and on all these news channels is a legit anything. He's not a scientist. He's not even a software creator. He's a megalomaniacal millionaire who became a billionaire who now stands on a world stage because he invested a bunch of money
and somehow
in a Rockefeller-like legacy to control people through the medical system. And that was the legacy of the Rockefellers in the 20th century. So
science-based medicine. And notice it's only about vaccine research.
It's new bottles for old wine.
That's exactly right. I'll finish up these quotes very quickly here. So, and the U.S. government should put in place a plan for conducting research during public health emergencies. I got that on the record. So, this last one here, we have to press forward. We have to press forward on new approaches to flu vaccine. We certainly need to forge ahead as rapidly as is possible in the development of a universal flu vaccine, which could provide broad coverage to the range of flu threats, that could face the country. But our best flu scientists say that there are major technical challenges. Doesn't that remind us what we went over last week?
It's the chicken or the egg problem with the vaccines. They need some mRNAs.
That's right.
New mRNAs.
It will take time to develop a universal flu vaccine. Yeah, they need also new technology. And it goes on to say, we do this even.
Universal flu vaccine is code for mRNA because that's the only way they can do it. That's the only way they could do it. Yeah,
that's correct. Yeah, we do this even though we have the technology to produce vaccine using modern recombinant techniques, using new production approaches.
Recombinations. We looked that up a couple of weeks ago, right?
Yes.
Recombinant.
Yes, we did. I think it was last week, in fact. I'm almost positive. Using new production through the technology to produce vaccine using new production approaches would allow us to accelerate our response in the event of flu pandemics and also lessen the chances
just in case one happened. Only 4 every century, but just in case one happens within months of writing this paper. Okay.
All right. The new threats that could inadvertently come from biological research. For example, it was announced last month that the USG moratorium for funding potential pandemic pathogen PPP research is over. This is January 23rd, 2018. Moratorium was lifted at the end of 2017.
On the thing that Fauci said didn't exist in the first place, they had to end the moratorium on that.
But, it's ostensibly, don't worry, Rich, it's this, they need to understand how gain of function works. For how viruses can jump from animal populations or animal reservoirs to humans. So they have a vaccine ready to go.
It's all for vaccine pandemics. They're preventing clearly they've done a great job.
Just like they're philanthropists and they're humanitarians. These aren't euphemisms. No, not at all.
They would never try to kill us with their kindness.
And for example, it was announced that the USG moratorium for funding potential pandemic pathogen research is over. It is possible once again to apply for USG funding to study ways of making the world's most lethal viruses like H5N1 respiratory transmissible like seasonal flu. In the worst case, this could lead to the accidental or deliberate release of a novel strain of virus that could cause an epidemic or even a pandemic. I mean,
glad
Jesus
that didn't
fucking
happen.
Christ.
Glad it didn't happen like that.
No, not at all.
It came from a wet mark. It makes me feel better.
Oh, man. And then last year, accidental or deliberate release of novel strain of virus that could, I think that was the last point she had highlighted. So then she goes on to talk, she gives me, or in the channel, she provides the Center for Health Security chair of board. You have BARDA, DHS, DARPA, NIH, Science Board. All of these make up essentially, I guess, what make up this report by Inglesby. Let's go up and look through. Yeah, Tom Inglesby.
Yeah.
So, and John Hopkins, Bloomberg School of Public Health. Oh, there you go.
From the people who brought you Event 201, practicing a coronavirus, novel respiratory virus pandemic in October of 2019. The people who knew there would be shortages of all this PPE and all these sort of things, and they thoughtfully went and stocked it up ahead of time as a result of doing this war game, so that America didn't have to suffer through anything, and therapeutics were widely available because Bloomberg School of Health and Johns Hopkins and Bill Gates and these people had Event 201, and they were able to prevent the pandemic and make sure that everyone was fortified with everything they needed. That is the absolute opposite of what these people did.
But
it's the opposite. It's the logical outcome of a meeting like that, yet they did not. I know. I wish there was. What's that thing that Ethan says to help me out?
The magical phrase.
You don't have to think about it, dude.
That's it. That's it.
It's a magical phrase.
That's it.
Bill Gates just saw a news article. Don't worry, Rich. He just saw a news article. He's just commenting on a news article. Nothing to see.
I feel a lot better. I sleep better with that narrative.
Maybe that's what makes Tim Pool sleep a little better too. Hey, one thing with Tim Pool is right. Crowder does the same thing. Like conspiracies can just be a couple of people. Yeah, we're not saying everyone. Many people who helped develop not just the.
What
mRNA
if a group of people got together and planned to take away the property of somebody else? Is that a conspiracy?
That is a conspiracy.
Well, I got some artifacts for Crowder.
I know. Well, the funny thing is, he's like, well, these people network together, and it's like, well, yeah, but it's only a couple. In a large organizations with 1,000 layers of complexity, wasn't that what Gatto once said?
Dude,
all these layers.
There's
of complexity.
nothing going on, but I could throw my cup and hit 3 Rhodes Scholars in any of the news that's in there every day. Pete Buttigieg. Zeke Emanuel, who's the doctor brother of Rahm Emanuel, who's the brother of Ari Emanuel, the Hollywood agent, who's the son of the Emanuel who was in the Irgun terrorist days of proto-Israel. There's a long history there. And then there's a whole bunch of other Rhodes Scholars. George Stephanopoulos, he's chiming in about all this stuff.
Yes.
You got
Rachel Maddow.
I was going to say the dude from MSNBC, Rachel Maddow.
The dude.
There's a bunch of Rhodes Scholars, and I'm not saying any of them are nefarious, but there's a problem.
Take the Rhodes bill, which is a perfect segue for our next.
Understand the influence of Oxford, 1,000-year-old university that fueled the British Empire, which still very much exists and has the Americans working as
why would the Rhodes
managers.
Scholarship be set up, Rich? I wonder why. That's an interesting
He wanted to create a secret society for some specific purpose. I remember it was in his last will and testament somewhere. Had something to do with America. And
is it modeled off a certain other organization?
Who was the people that educated Fauci?
Oh, the Jesuits.
Yeah. Cecil Rhodes said he wanted to use the Jesuits but replace Roman Catholic Church with British Empire, and its goal should be to bring America.
But that's not a conspiracy.
It wouldn't be. No, well, from the American side, it would be, but from a British side, you wouldn't see that as a conspiracy at all. So maybe that's the thing. Maybe we should just look at it from the British side.
Let's see what Alex Jones says about the stuff.
We are psyched, and we are now prepared for the next clip, which is United States government signs secret treaty with Pfizer, worldwide medical extermination system now under corporate command. This is coming from the InfoWars people, and I'm sure they have the documents too. Let's check it out.
He read the books.
Whoa. Hang on.
Hold on. Hold your horses.
Meanwhile, did you mention Epstein recently? I mean, you were talking about Bill Gates, and
I said Epstein in there. I said Epstein and Bill Gates and Zora Ranch, and the fact that Microsoft CEOs were connected with Epstein and all that good stuff.
Well, he's dead, so in general, you always have to be careful.
Well, he's dead. Nothing
It'd
to
be
see
good
there.
if we had a T-shirt that said Epstein didn't McAfee himself, and McAfee didn't Epstein himself. Do we have something like that around?
I have a crazy.
We do. But right now, Tony, I could use your help. I'm a little lost in the show.
Yeah. I'm gonna real quick, since you mentioned Epstein, I'm gonna show this. So it's at the very first
clip under therapeutics. Yeah.
But while he gets set up, the Pope, the pedo, and the pimp beaming Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, blessed by the Pope. Now, this is Pope John Paul II.
Hold on a second. There's 3 people in the picture, but that's just talking about. Oh, okay.
Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, blessed by the Pope, showing they're all powerful.
Does all three.
This is from the Sun, and it goes. I wanted to get this on the record because Pope John Paul II, from a Roman Catholic perspective, is considered one of the great popes in Catholic history. Interestingly enough, I had a friend, unfortunately, go to a very sketchy Catholic loosely affiliated Catholic organization when we had just finished we graduated high school and we're in college, called the Legionnaires of Christ. Now, we found out that the head of the Legionnaires of Christ was a notorious serial pedophile, and he helped funnel millions and millions, hundreds of millions of euros to John Paul II's Vatican.
What?
So
I'm sure John Paul didn't know that, dude.
So we have Epstein. We have
he didn't work for IG Farben and had nothing to do with Zyklon B. John Paul II.
There you go, too. But hey, the story is he drove out the Nazis in Poland. He helped. You didn't hear that story about how he conducted a Catholic mass in Poland, and like they're all the propaganda around John Paul II.
And he only got his job because the other guy quit after 33 days in a ritual manner. That's
right, 33. I wonder if that's a sacred number.
What happened to John Paul I? Did it have anything to do with the Vatican bank scandal and
BCC?
Michelle Sindona and the Blackfriars Bridge? And P2, Propaganda Due, Freemasonic Lodge? Are any of these things points of history? Because I got books on these things. This is history. It's just not American history.
Right.
It's world history. It's history of control and banking.
The banking.
Power and influence. It's the most interesting. I could pull an Opus Dei book off my shelf and show you where they're talking in that book about the Michelle Sindona Blackfriars Bridge. Like, I could
that's a whole, I remember studying that in depth back. Oh my God, they sort of immortalize it a little bit in elements, I think, of Godfather 3. They bring it's a fictitious,
what do you think?
They're trying to point to
Immobiliare.
Immobiliare. Mm-hmm.